When the clock struck midnight in New Orleans, it was supposed to be joy, music, fireworks. But just hours later, that same street would become a war zone. Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve 2024 was electric. From early afternoon, the French Quarter pulsed with anticipation, locals and tourists shoulder to shoulder, music echoing off old brick walls, laughter rising above the brass bands and DJ sets pouring out of every bar and balcony. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a citywide ritual, a sensory explosion of color, noise, and tradition. The day had kicked off with the Sugar Bowl parade, a dazzling display of floats, marching bands, and university pride. With the Georgia Bulldogs set to face off against Notre Dame, fans flooded into New Orleans, turning every corner into a tailgate party. Bars were packed, beads flew through the air, and Bourbon Street became a living, breathing carnival. As the sky darkened, the energy didn't dip, it surged. Thousands gathered in Jackson Square for the annual Fleur de Lis drop, a symbolic gesture of renewal and hope as midnight approached. Fireworks lit up the Mississippi River, cheers erupted, and for a brief, shining moment, the city was united in joy. This was one of the most secure nights in New Orleans until it wasn't. Shamsud-Din Jabbar wasn't on any federal watch list. He wasn't part of any known extremist group. To those who met him, he was just another face in the crowd, an educated man with a degree in computer information systems, a former U.S. Army Staff Sergeant who served in Afghanistan, and a quiet specialist working in government services. He earned a six-figure salary at Deloitte. He had a clean-cut look, wore glasses, and had once taken pride in serving his country. He didn't look like someone planning mass murder. Jabbar lived in Houston in a suburban neighborhood. He had 3 ex-wives, children, a mortgage, and years of service behind him. He wasn't homeless, he wasn't visibly angry, and he didn't fit the profile most people think of when they picture a domestic terrorist. If you'd passed him on the street, you wouldn't have looked twice. He blended in until he didn't. Shamsud-Din Jabbar once wore the uniform of the United States Army with pride. He served honorably for over a decade, including a deployment to Afghanistan. He rose to the rank of Staff Sergeant, handling human resources and the duties for the 82nd Airborne Division. After leaving active duty, he transitioned into civilian life. With what looked like success, he earned a business degree in computer information systems and landed a high-paying role at Deloitte, working on government contracts. But beneath the surface, things were falling apart. His personal life was marked by a string of failed marriages, 3 in total. He struggled with mounting alimony payments and child support that drained a quarter of his income. Friends said he became distant, withdrawn. His once outgoing demeanor gave way to isolation. By 2024, he had cut ties with most of his social circle and moved into a tight-knit religious community north of Houston. There, he began to change. He stopped listening to music. He preached online about morality, condemning everyday behavior as sinful. He posted voice recordings about the end times and warned of satanic influences. His speech turned more rigid, more absolute. Somewhere along the way, he cracked. By 2024, Shamsud-Din Jabbar wasn't just withdrawing, he was broadcasting. Alone in his Houston home, he began uploading long, unsettling voice recordings to SoundCloud. In them, his tone was calm, but the content was deeply alarming. He spoke about divine judgment, the moral decay of society, and the evils of modern culture. He condemned music as a gateway to sin, calling it the voice of Satan spreading among the prophet's followers. And he meant it. He railed against alcohol, marijuana, even casual celebration. He claimed the world had lost its way, and that believers had a duty to stand against the disbelievers. But no one flagged the recordings. No one reached out. His spiral into extremism happened in near total silence. He rarely left his home. He wasn't seen at mosques. He had no public connections to radical groups. He lived in a bubble of isolation, paranoia, and online sermons. The signs were there loud, repetitive, chilling, but no one was watching. On the night of December 31st, as fireworks lit up the sky and crowds filled every inch of the French Quarter, Shamsud-Din Jabbar was already in position. He had driven into New Orleans earlier that day in a rented white Ford F-150 Lightning, making his way from Houston with a quiet, deliberate focus. Instead of checking into a hotel or joining the celebrations, he went straight to a short-term rental home in the St. Roch neighborhood where he began preparing. He wasn't unpacking party clothes or travel gear. He was unloading coolers, two of them containing homemade explosive devices filled with nails, tacks, and shrapnel. These weren't random items. They were part of a carefully timed plan. As the city's energy peaked in the early hours of the new year, Jabbar moved silently through the French Quarter. At one intersection, he set down the first cooler near St. Peter Street. Later, he placed the second at Bourbon and Toulouse. Both were rigged to explode remotely. And while the city celebrated, he was recording. In a series of 5 videos uploaded to Facebook between late night and the early morning hours, Jabbar pledged loyalty to the Islamic State. He spoke of faith, war, and betrayal, his voice calm, his message chilling. He said he considered inviting his family to a party just so they could witness what he planned to do. He wasn't just thinking of killing strangers. He had fantasized about turning it into a spectacle. New Year's in New Orleans is always unforgettable, but this time it would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Bourbon Street was supposed to be protected. In fact, the city of New Orleans had invested heavily in safety measures years earlier, installing steel bollards and acquiring special anti-vehicle barricades known as Archer barriers. They were designed for nights exactly like this: packed sidewalks, massive public gatherings, and high-alert scenarios. But on the night it mattered most, they weren't in place. As the countdown ended and the crowd thinned slightly into the early hours of the new year, Jabbar approached the French Quarter in his white pickup truck. Police had placed barricades at key intersections, but the permanent bollards had been removed in preparation for the Sugar Bowl, and the temporary Archer barriers, the ones that could have stopped him, had been forgotten. Some weren't deployed. Others had reportedly malfunctioned. Jabbar bypassed one of the police vehicles and swerved onto the sidewalk. From there, he accelerated directly into the crowd. Witnesses later said the sound of the truck hitting people was masked at first by music and fireworks. It wasn't until bodies were flying that people understood what was happening. For 3 blocks, the truck didn't stop. Police would later admit that they weren't aware the Archer barriers were even in city storage. The systems meant to stop a vehicle attack weren't just disabled, they were ignored. And in those seconds, when the crowd had no chance to react, New Orleans went from celebration to catastrophe. In the heart of the French Quarter, just after the city welcomed the new year, Shamsud-Din Jabbar made his move. Behind the wheel of the white pickup, he turned onto Bourbon Street and floored the gas. The truck roared past stunned pedestrians and crashed through the festive calm like a missile. He didn't brake. He didn't hesitate. Jabbar plowed through 3 blocks of dense foot traffic between Canal and Conti streets, aiming directly at people. Witnesses described the moment as pure chaos. Some thought it was part of the celebration. Others froze. Many tried to run, but had nowhere to go. The music kept playing from open bars as screams began to rise above it. Steel barricades, which should have been raised, were either malfunctioning or missing. People were launched into the air. Others were dragged beneath the vehicle. A city built for parades and pageantry had no defense against what was happening. At the end of the run, Jabbar's truck slammed into an aerial work platform, finally coming to a halt. But it wasn't over. Jabbar stepped out of the cab, wearing body armor, armed with a Glock and an R-10 rifle. Without a word, he opened fire. Two police officers responded immediately, engaging him in a shootout right there in the middle of Bourbon Street. The standoff lasted only moments. Jabbar was hit multiple times in the torso and collapsed to the ground. 14 civilians were dead, 2 officers wounded, 57 injured in total. And in the span of just 2 minutes, a single man had turned one of the safest, most joyous nights in New Orleans into a battlefield. Those who were there that night still struggled to describe it. At first, many thought it was a stunt, some kind of street performance gone wrong. Others believed the screeching tires were part of a burnout show, but the illusion shattered instantly as bodies were struck and tossed like rag dolls into the air. One woman said she heard what she thought were fireworks until she saw people bleeding on the pavement. Another man recalled turning around just in time to see the headlights bearing down too fast, too close. "I thought I was dead," he told reporters, his voice shaking. "Then I saw someone get hit right in front of me." There was no warning, no announcement, just the horrifying reality that someone had weaponized a pickup truck and turned a party into a massacre. After the crash, witnesses saw the drivers step out with weapons in hand. One bartender, who ducked behind the bar, later said, "It looked like something from a war movie. He didn't yell, didn't talk, just started shooting." Even as police opened fire and brought Jabbar down, the panic didn't stop. People were running, hiding in alleys, pulling strangers to safety. Emergency responders flooded the street, confused, overwhelmed, and desperate to find the injured in the crowd. In those moments, the lights of Bourbon Street flickered not with celebration, but with sirens flashing red and blue, casting long shadows over a street that had become a scene of horror. And for everyone who survived, one question kept echoing in their minds: how did this happen here? As the truck came to a violent stop, slammed against an aerial lift, there was a brief, eerie silence. Then the gunfire began. Shamsud-Din Jabbar stepped out of the driver's side wearing body armor and carrying 2 weapons, a Glock handgun and an R-10 semi-automatic rifle fitted with a homemade suppressor. There was no hesitation. He raised his weapon and opened fire into the crowd and at police officers rushing toward the scene. 2 officers were hit during the exchange. Both survived, thanks to quick medical intervention, but the chaos on Bourbon Street was far from over. Civilians screamed and scattered, some ducking behind garbage bins, others crawling under tables, still unsure what was happening. A few brave bystanders tried to drag the wounded to safety, while gunshots echoed off the French Quarter's narrow walls. The shootout lasted just under a minute, but in real time, it felt endless. Police fired back with precision. Jabbar was struck 4 times in the torso. He collapsed beside the truck, still clutching his weapon. Medics on the scene confirmed he died where he fell. In his truck, officers found more than just weapons. They discovered an ISIS flag, multiple rounds of ammunition, and a remote detonator for the 2 pipe bombs he'd planted hours earlier. The intent was clear. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was a calculated strike. And though Jabbar was down, the city was only beginning to understand the scale of what had just happened. Even as police secured the scene and tended to the wounded, another danger lurked, one that hadn't gone off, but could have made the death toll far worse. Not long after Jabbar was killed, bomb squads combing the French Quarter made a chilling discovery: 2 improvised explosive devices hidden inside ordinary coolers. One was found near St. Peter Street, the other just a few blocks away at Bourbon and Toulouse. Both were packed with nails, screws, and shrapnel meant to rip through flesh and bone if detonated. The devices were primitive but deadly. Each was connected to a remote trigger, the kind that could be activated by a simple wireless signal. Investigators later found the matching transmitter inside Jabbar's truck. They believe he had planned to set them off during the attack or immediately after, possibly to target first responders or fleeing civilians. The only thing that stopped them from exploding was Jabbar's failure to wire the detonators correctly. The FBI called the bombs crude but intended to kill. Had they gone off in the middle of the crowd, the number of victims would have soared. It wasn't just a vehicular rampage. It wasn't just a shootout. It was a multi-layered attack planned with chilling intent. And while the worst-case scenario was narrowly avoided, the message was clear. Jabbar didn't just want chaos. He wanted carnage. In the hours leading up to the attack, while thousands in New Orleans counted down to the new year, Shamsud-Din Jabbar was recording his final words. Between late night and the early morning, he posted 5 videos to Facebook. In them, he pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, referenced apocalyptic beliefs, and framed his upcoming violence as part of a war between the believers and the disbelievers. His tone was eerily calm, no shouting, no anger, just conviction. He spoke of betrayal, of corrupted faith, of a society he believed had turned its back on God. At one point, he said he had considered staging a family gathering, only to have his loved ones witness the killings themselves. It wasn't just violence he wanted, it was spectacle, legacy, a twisted form of martyrdom. In one recording, he declared that music, alcohol, and celebration were all tools of the devil. That New Year's Eve, in his view, wasn't a moment of joy, it was a symbol of moral collapse, and he had decided to strike directly at it. These weren't offhand rants. They were methodical, rehearsed, and filled with religious language twisted into justification. The FBI would later confirm these videos were authentic and that Jabbar recorded them alone, without input or direction from any known terrorist group. He radicalized himself. He built his own ideology, brick by brick, in digital silence. And when the final video ended, he picked up his keys and drove to Bourbon Street. In the quiet that followed the sirens and screams, New Orleans was left reeling. The French Quarter, normally filled with music, laughter, and the clatter of footsteps, was cordoned off with yellow tape. Blood stained the cobblestones. Confetti from the celebration still drifted through the air like mocking reminders of what the night was supposed to be. 14 innocent lives were lost. 57 others were injured, some critically, others emotionally shattered. 2 police officers were among the wounded. Emergency rooms filled. Families flooded local hospitals searching for answers, some learning that a loved one would never come home again. City officials moved quickly. The Sugar Bowl, originally scheduled for later that night, was postponed. A reunification center was set up for victims and families. Hotels near the scene were evacuated. Workers were turned away. Tourists, many still in shock, left early, their vacations cut short by grief. Vigils sprang up on corners. Candles, photos, and handwritten messages began appearing along Bourbon Street. The city held a moment of silence before the rescheduled Sugar Bowl and again before the Super Bowl weeks later. Chants of US echoed across stadiums, not in triumph, but in solidarity. Even the NFL and local teams, the Saints and Pelicans, joined together to donate $1 million to help victims and their families. Flags across Louisiana were lowered, and people from around the world sent messages of sympathy, disbelief, and outrage. Because this wasn't just an attack on a crowd, it was an attack on the idea of celebration itself. And New Orleans, a city built on celebration, was left with a wound that will never fully heal. As investigators picked through evidence and questioned witnesses, another narrative began to emerge, one that had nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with oversight. The city had the tools to stop this and didn't use them. Back in 2017, after international warnings about vehicle-based terror attacks, New Orleans had purchased a fleet of Archer barriers high-tech, L-shaped steel structures designed to stop cars and trucks dead in their tracks. They'd been deployed successfully during Mardi Gras and other large events. But on New Year's Eve 2024, they were sitting in storage. Worse, some officials didn't even know they existed. Permanent bollards that once guarded Bourbon Street had been removed for maintenance in preparation for the Sugar Bowl. Temporary police barricades were the only line of defense, and many of those were either poorly positioned or left unraised. There was no redundancy, no backup. The city's own records show that officers had warned about vulnerabilities in the French Quarter for years. Reports were filed, budgets approved, but somewhere between bureaucracy, holiday fatigue, and miscommunication, the chain of protection snapped. Superintendent Anne Kirkpatrick admitted during a press conference that she hadn't even been aware the Archer barriers were still in the city's possession. Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser called it a failure from the top down. On the streets, angry locals didn't mince words. They scrawled, "Use me," in bold letters across the steel barriers, now suddenly visible after the attack. Because in the end, it wasn't just one man who broke through. It was a system that left the door open. In the weeks after the attack, one haunting question kept surfacing not just in New Orleans, but across the country. How did no one see this coming? Shamsud-Din Jabbar wasn't a ghost. He had a digital footprint. He had a military past. He posted public videos pledging allegiance to ISIS just minutes before the attack. He built pipe bombs, drove across state lines, and planted explosives in one of America's most surveilled neighborhoods, and yet not a single alert was triggered. He wasn't on a federal watch list. He hadn't been flagged by social media algorithms. His online recordings were extreme, yes, but hidden in plain sight. To tech platforms, they were just long, quiet rants. To family, he was becoming distant and overly religious, but not violent. And to law enforcement, he was a complete unknown. The FBI later confirmed he acted alone. No foreign handlers, no logistical support, just a man radicalized in isolation, stewing in ideology and resentment. He even traveled abroad 11 days in Egypt, a few more in Canada, but none of it set off alarms. The truth is unsettling. He didn't slip through the cracks. The cracks were just that wide. In a post-attack debrief, one federal agent admitted there was no chatter, no second man, no intel. It was a perfect storm of silence. And that silence cost 14 lives. They were parents, students, tourists, locals, people who had come to Bourbon Street not for politics or war, but for joy. Some were celebrating the Sugar Bowl. Others had made New Orleans their destination to start the new year with laughter, music, and memory-making. None of them expected to die that night. 14 lives were taken in an instant. 11 men and 3 women, ranging in age from just 18 to 63. They came from Louisiana, New York, Georgia, California, and even as far as London. Among them was a British national, Edward Pettifer, stepson of Tiggy Leg Burke, the former nanny to Princes William and Harry. One was a nurse in training, another a father of 2. A young college student from Georgia had only arrived that evening. A beloved New Orleans bartender known by regulars for his laugh was found lifeless in the street he'd worked on for over a decade. Dozens more were injured, some physically, limbs shattered, ribs broken, others emotionally. Survivors described the scene like something out of a nightmare. The screams, the blood, the sheer confusion. For many, therapy will only go so far. Some said they can't go near crowds anymore. Others left the city and never looked back. Families now visit makeshift memorials where their loved ones took their final breaths. Photos, candles, beads, and handwritten notes line Bourbon Street. Because even in a city that knows how to grieve with jazz funerals and second lines, this pain runs deeper. It wasn't just lives that were stolen, it was innocence, celebration, trust. As the public tried to make sense of the horror, attention turned to the people who knew Shamsud-Din Jabbar best, his family. But what they said only deepened the mystery. His brother, speaking through tears in a local interview, admitted he was blindsided. "That's not the man I knew," he said. "He lost his mind. I lost my brother, and so many others lost everything because of him." He told reporters the FBI questioned him for hours, hoping for answers, but he had none. Jabbar's daughters were reportedly distraught. One of his ex-wives had cut off contact months earlier, concerned about his behavior and increasingly rigid beliefs. Another said she didn't feel safe letting him near the children anymore. Even his former army peers were at a loss. Some recalled him being quiet, serious, and professional. No one remembered signs of violence or fanaticism. In college, he'd been the guy who partied a little too hard, nothing close to a terrorist. His father, a Muslim convert, had passed down the surname Jabbar. His mother remained a Christian. His upbringing was complex but not radical. Friends said he'd once dreamed of starting his own business, traveling, building something for his kids, but none of them saw what was coming, or maybe they didn't want to. Because denial is its own form of survival, and for those left behind, grappling with the reality that someone they loved caused so much pain, it's a weight they may never fully set down. The shockwaves from the New Orleans attack didn't stop at the city limits. Within hours, statements poured in from around the world. Leaders from France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Israel, and dozens of other countries condemned the violence and expressed solidarity with the American people. Pope Francis sent his prayers. King Charles Roman III personally acknowledged the loss of British citizen Edward Pettifer. Even Prince William and Princess Catherine issued a rare public statement of grief. The Islamic Society of Greater Houston, the largest in Jabbar's hometown, was quick to denounce the act. "This has no place in Islam," their statement read. "We are horrified by this senseless crime." And yet, on January 9th, the terror group Jabbar pledged allegiance to responded in a very different way. In its weekly publication, ISIS praised the attack. They called Jabbar a hero, a model. They encouraged others to follow his path. It was a chilling reminder. Even if Jabbar acted alone, the ideology he subscribed to was very much alive. And for radical groups seeking to inspire copycats, his name became fuel. At the same time, cities across the US and Europe began reevaluating their own New Year security protocols. In Pasadena, a moment of silence was held during the Rose Parade. In Washington, federal agencies reviewed communication gaps. In London, Paris, and Berlin, police increased vehicle barricades in public gathering spots. Because the message had been received loud and clear, terror didn't need a group or a bomb to strike. Just one man, a truck, and a plan. In the days that followed the attack, the FBI launched one of the most intensive terror investigations in recent US history. Dozens of agents scoured New Orleans, Houston, and every digital trace Shamsud-Din Jabbar had left behind. Inside his rental home in the St. Roch neighborhood, investigators found explosive materials, accelerants, and signs he had attempted to destroy evidence by setting a small fire. The fire didn't spread, but it told a story. He wanted to erase his tracks. He wanted this to end with no return. They also discovered something eerie. Jabbar had been wearing Meta-Smart glasses when the attack began. But despite fears that he may have live-streamed the violence, officials confirmed he never hit record. It seemed he was documenting it more for himself than the world. Forensics teams traced the origins of his weapons. The R-10 rifle had been purchased through a private transaction in Texas just weeks earlier. The handgun source is still under review. And the pipe bombs, crude, unstable, and stuffed with nails built with RDX, but lacking a proper detonator, a detail that may have spared dozens more lives. One by one, the pieces came together. Videos posted between night and early morning. Pipe bombs planted before dawn. The rented truck spotted on traffic cams from Texas to Louisiana. Every move calculated. Every choice down to the route he took intentional. But the scariest part, there was no second man, no network, no warning. The FBI declared he was 100% inspired by ISIS, but he acted alone. A lone wolf with military discipline, extremist conviction, and a digital stage. In the wake of the attack, New Orleans did what every city does after a tragedy. It promised change. The Archer barriers, once forgotten in storage, were finally deployed throughout the French Quarter. Police departments across the country reevaluated their public event security plans. The NFL ramped up its safety protocols ahead of the upcoming Super Bowl, held in the same city just weeks later. A league-wide moment of silence was observed. The Saints and the Pelicans pledged $1 million in aid to victims' families. But for many locals, those changes felt too late. City leaders were grilled in press conferences. Why were the permanent bollards removed in peak season? Why weren't officers aware of the backup barriers? Why was no one watching Jabbar despite his obvious online radicalization? Some answers came, many didn't. Handwritten signs began appearing on barricades after the attack. Use me. We were here. Quiet protests against negligence that echoed louder than any speech. The FBI made its rounds, closing in on every loose end. Still, the big picture remained grim. There was no failed system to hack, just gaps, oversights, a man who quietly prepared for war while the city planned for parades. And as life returned to Bourbon Street, as tourists resumed their strolls and jazz floated back into the air, a subtle tension remained. Because even with stronger barriers and louder sirens, the truth lingered. Prevention only works when we're willing to look at the things we don't want to see. What happened in New Orleans wasn't just a terror attack. It was a test of our systems, our awareness, our belief that some places, some nights are sacred and untouchable. On that New Year's morning, a city known for survival was brought to its knees by one man with a truck and a mission. A man who once wore the uniform of the US Army. A man who once danced, drank, and laughed like anyone else, until something inside him changed. He didn't come from overseas. He didn't sneak across a border. He rented a vehicle, recorded a video, drove through a city full of light and music, and chose death over dialogue. And maybe that's the part that haunts us most. It didn't take an army. It took a man we thought we recognized. Now, every January, as the clock ticks down in the French Quarter, the cheers are a little softer, the eyes a little more alert, because New Orleans will always rise, always rebuild, but it will never forget. This wasn't just a moment of violence. It was a warning, a reminder that joy is powerful but fragile, and that even in a city built on celebration, darkness can still find a way in. The question isn't if we remember. The question is what we'll do to make sure it never happens again.